Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Get Started Composting workshop. Thank you for joining. We are Circular Economy Manufacturing. We're very excited to have you all join us today. Some of you may know us, some of you may not. For those of you who don't, we're a design and manufacturing company, and we make products from post-consumer plastic by means of 100% solar energy. But beyond that, we also promote daily practices that we can all adopt to start living a more sustainable lifestyle. So that's a little bit what we'll be doing today. So also every month we have expert guest panel discussions diving into different topics, sustainable practices like composting and recycling, and how to incorporate these into our daily lives. So in February, we hosted our Composting 101 workshop, which was quite a success. So today we'll start by reiterating some of that content, but this time we'll have some demonstrations and a few bonuses for you. We'll start by introducing our company and our mission before then delving into composting and why it's so important to begin this practice, if you don't already. So also just to let you know, for future reference, you'll be able to find our workshops and podcasts and all other resources that we'll be mentioning on the workshop at our website, circulareconomymfg.com, and just hit the tab Resources and Workshops, and you'll get straight there. So I'll start by introducing our lovely panelists today. We've got Barent Roth. He's our director and co-founder at Circular Economy Manufacturing. Barent has abundant experience in the field. One of those experiences was serving as the executive director of Sustainable Works in Santa Monica, in California, where he taught a green living workshop to community members there for several years. We then have Maite, who's our workshop coordinator and our Bokashi composting expert. We have Bella Martina, who is she's one of our designers here, and she based her thesis at Parsons School of Design here in New York City on composting. And myself, I'm Celeste Rose, a designer here, and have the pleasure of being your host today. So now I'll be passing it on to Barent.
Hello, everybody. Hope you all are enjoying Circular City Week this week and taking advantage of the numerous events and discussions. Our company, Circular Economy Manufacturing, has a shared vision with Circular City. So I wanted to just briefly touch on what we're doing, and then we'll get into our composting workshop. So we take single-use plastic and turn it into durable products. And we do that in a solar-powered MicroFactory. Let's take a look at a video that shows the whole process in action. So the first thing is we have to collect the energy. So we have a solar array, 25 solar panels on top that are collecting energy into a battery bank, which we use to then shred the single-use plastic product, plastic packaging. And then take those flakes and put them into an innovative rotational molding system that rotates the shredded flakes, heats them up. The solid flakes turn into a liquid. They cook the inside of the mold, and the resulting product is a hard plastic hollow object. Next slide. So this is all in an effort to transition society from linear to a circular economy. And I believe we have an animation here as well. So the idea is, oops, hang on. So we want to transition from a linear to a circular economy. So we go from taking materials out of the ground and either burying them or burning them in what's now referred to as the linear economy. And instead, we take the little bit that's being recycled now, and we start building on it. And we add solar energy as our source of input, and we produce long-lasting, durable products that we'll take back and repair and refurbish and recycle back into new products. Let's go to the next slide. So what I'd like to share is that our process deals with what's known as the technical cycle. But if we go, so the technical cycle includes the recycling of plastics, metal, and glass. But if we go to the next slide, our first product is dealing with the biological cycle. The biological cycle is referring to food and wood and agricultural waste. So the idea is, if as designers we separate all of the objects that we make into one of those two cycles, then you don't have anything that is waste. So our first product is actually a food scrap collection bin. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so we hope that today you can get started composting with that. I'm going to turn it over to Bella, and she's going to walk us through the first of many methods.
Yeah, thanks, Barrett. So just to reiterate, today we're going to briefly talk about what composting is and why it's important, and then we'll get into some methods, which we'll have a virtual demonstration of for everyone. So to begin with, what is compost? Compost is a nutrient-rich material made of food scraps and other organic material, which is added to the soil to naturally improve its quality and reduce the need for additives and chemical fertilizers. Everyone can participate in composting, and actually composting your food scraps is one of the most impactful actions an individual can take to personally combat the climate crisis. Before we get too far into composting, I just want to break down two terms really quick that are often confused, food waste and food scraps. So food waste, also referred to as food loss, refers to food that is not eaten. So food waste occurs throughout the food system, but basically it's when edible food, for one reason or another, doesn't make it to our plates. So as you can see in this image, we're looking at whole bananas, whole bell peppers, packaged things, like things that could have been eaten if they were, if things that could have been eaten. On the other hand, food scraps refer to unavoidable waste products from food preparations. This is like apple cores, banana peels, vegetable stems, fruit peels, things that you don't really want to eat. So when we're talking about things to compost, ideally you're composting the food scraps. So the goal of composting is to avoid putting a whole head of broccoli in there or a whole carton of strawberries. So now Maite's going to talk a little bit about why it's important to compost.
Hi, everybody. So when you throw food into the garbage, it goes into a landfill inside a garbage bag or in between layers of trash, and it ends up producing methane because it's taking so long to break down without oxygen. Methane is a greenhouse gas 21 times more harmful than carbon dioxide, and it is one of the most significant drivers of climate change. People are misguided to believe that when you throw something into the garbage and it goes to a landfill, that it is going to break down, but it's not. Food cannot properly decompose under layers of waste without access to light, oxygen, or moisture. It takes 25 years for a head of lettuce to decompose in a landfill, while in a compost pile, it can only take about 4 weeks. Landfill space is limited, and creating more is expensive, it's undesirable, and it simply shouldn't be an option anymore. So by composting, you reduce the food and the bulk of waste in landfill while also producing a valuable fertilizer that rejuvenates the life around you. So unfortunately, landfills are not made to decompose. They are made to store. Besides reducing the volume material in a landfill, composting also reduces household waste by, drum roll, 60%. Food is the single largest component taking up space inside of US landfills. So when you recycle and you compost, you have very little material that is actually trash. What also happened in my experience was that having my food scraps and my waste separate, I could really see how much waste I was producing and what kind, so I could make adjustments and other decisions that later became sustainable practices, saving me space, saving the planet, and saving me money. Project Drawdown is one of the leading institutes studying the climate change crisis and finding solutions for climate crisis. They have highly ranked composting as a necessary component to helping the world reach drawdown. Drawdown is the point in which the future levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere stop climbing, they stop increasing, and they start to decline, therefore stopping the catastrophic consequences of climate change. Project Drawdown offers studies and climate solutions for climate change and is an awesome website for you to check out. So how does composting work? You collect food scraps into a bin or a container, whatever you have, and by doing so, you're adding the ingredients for composting. Nitrogen-rich green materials like fruit and vegetables, and carbon-rich brown materials such as dried leaves, wood shavings will result in rich compost material. These ingredients are then processed, and we'll cover different kinds of processes later on and how you can do that. But the result of this process is compost, and you can use compost as soil, as the base for farms, parks, and your houseplants. You can start collection compostable materials following a basic rule of thumb. If it was grown in soil, then it can be compostable. We all produce compostable food scraps when we cook, fruits, vegetable peels, shavings, shells, coffee grounds, even flower trimmings after an event, ripped paper bags or paper towels, and so on. However, just make sure with your local compost location guidelines in case there's possible exceptions. Compostable bags, as we see here on the slide,
Might freeze. I think she froze.
Sustain high temperatures needed to break down these bioplastics. They have to be BPI certified in order to be, sorry, the internet connection.
You froze a little bit, Maite. I think lost you right at the green biodegradable bags. If you can talk about what the yellow circles mean and the red circle.
Yep, thank you for letting me know where it cut off. So there's a difference between biodegradable bags and compostable bags. You want to make sure that they're biodegradable because these can disintegrate on their own. Compostable bags are different. They need to sustain the process of an industrial composter and that kind of industrial equipment in order to actually break down. So it's not actually going to biodegrade if you just throw it away. Also, cutlery goes into the same category of biodegradable versus compostable. It's important for you to make sure that it's biodegradable. And to know other distinctions, meat products and dairy products are usually not accepted in compost sites, although you should check with your compost sites and the guidelines to see whether they or not they accept it. Most of New York City sites are not industrial, so it's important to check. The good news is that compostable bags and BPI certified or compostable home compostable items can be composted at most compost facilities. One thing that is actually like out of the question for composting is the produce stickers. They are not biodegradable. They do not break down. They're basically plastic, and there's no other way to process them out other than hand sifting through the compost. So now that we've got those basics out of the way, we'll be presenting 6 popular types of composting methods. As this is Get Started Composting, we'll be introducing them briefly. We've got little demos coming for you guys. And in the coming workshops, we'll be also featuring expert guests deep diving into each of these methods. So we highly recommend you stay tuned, check us out so you can attend the rest of the workshop series.
Okay, so we're going to start with food scrap collection, which includes both drop-off locations and curbside collection. So drop-off locations are the easiest way to start composting in urban areas. To participate, all you need is a container and a plan. So New York City has many drop-off sites and resources to help you get started, but also cities around the world also host free food scrap drop-off locations for their residents. these sites basically, they take your food scraps to a facility for processing and turn them into compost. So you don't have to do any of the composting yourself. You're just collecting the material. And then the compost is used locally in parks and gardens, but it's also available to the residents if they want to purchase some for their gardens. So in order to do this, the first step is to find your local site. So you can do this by visiting this list from Litterlist, or by simply Googling composting in my area if you're not in New York City. And if you are in New York City, Grow NYC has a really great map that you can check out to see where the sites are, what days they're open, and they're open year round. There's been a few closures due to COVID, but they're coming back. So after you find out where to take your compost, the next step is to start just collecting your food scraps when you're cooking. So eventually you'll probably want to get some kind of designated bin, but to get started, you can use anything you want. On the left of this slide, we have some examples of creative solutions that people use, like milk cartons, Tupperware, tomato cans. You can literally use anything. When dropping your food scraps off, there's really no composting happening inside your home bin. So if you're only dropping off once a week or bi-weekly, you might want to store your compost in a fridge or freezer. This is something I used to do in New York for two reasons. One, freezing it prevents any smells from happening. So if you're busy, you can't take it, this is a good option. As well, like I had very limited counter space, so keeping it in the freezer was just like the best option because I had more room in my freezer than my counter. So now we have some drop-off etiquette. So when you're going to these drop-off locations, you really want to help the volunteers out because the volunteers are the people processing the material. So you want to make it easy for them. So if you're using the BPI certified bags, as Maite was talking about, you have to make sure that the site accepts them first. A lot of sites may not. And also they ask you to rip open the bags and dump everything out. This makes their bins hold more, but it also makes it just look better for everybody walking by. Another rule, no plastic at all. Like if you're not sure it probably doesn't go in there. The volunteers have to hand sift through all the compost to pick out plastic bags, and it's just a real disaster. And then lastly, paper bags are compostable. But if you are composting them, please rip them up so they can easily break down more easily and faster. And then we also have curbside pickup, which is similar, except that you don't have to go to the drop-off site. There's a few areas in New York City that have curbside pickup, and there are a lot throughout the country that also do curbside pickup. So if you're lucky, you'll have it, and you have a bin outside that you can just dump your food scraps in. You can visit your city's Department of Sanitation website to see if curbside pickup is available. More materials might be accepted, such as meat and dairy, because curbside pickup does go to an industrial facility most of the time. So this is kind of a perk of curbside.
All right, thanks, Bella. That was great. So there's really curbside and drop-off under food scrap collection. Those are really simple and easy ways to get started. If you're ready to take the next step, then vermiculture is a terrific way to compost where you let the worms do the work for you. And I think, Maite, you've got a guest. Maybe you can show a
we've got a couple of guests. So in this container, this is the finished product of compost, and here on this side we've got a couple of food scraps, and within those, these guys love to squiggle around, but we've got a little worm here, and these are really great. They love the moisture, they hate the light, so I've been bothering this little fella, but it's really great to be working with worms. It's super fun, and my baby cousins love it, so it's a super fun way to get this.
So Maite's got the worms. I used to use a worm bin when I lived in Los Angeles and could keep it outside. We use the Coir and Ash method now. So I'll talk about that in a moment. The principle of a worm bin is you start with a series of trays. So you're going to have some type of container like the one pictured there, And I have these as a model, right? So if you think of the first tray, you put down your dirt and your worms, and you maybe shred up some newspaper and lay it into this first layer. And then you start to add food into this layer. And this is a big, it's maybe a couple of feet in diameter. I'm just showing you a small one so I can hold it in front of the camera. So you've got this large circular area in which you've created a little nest for the worms to start to move around in. And then when you're ready to start adding your food scraps, you drop them in, and the worms start to eat the food scraps, and their waste is collected in a little drain, and that's called worm tea. So they have liquid waste, and then their solid waste just becomes part of the system. Right, perfect. So this is what I'm showing in my hand is like when you get started. And then when you're ready to add more, you add a second layer on top, and you do the same thing, but this time you really can just start adding food. And what happens is at the bottom of each of these layers, I don't have it on my model here, but there are little tiny holes. And the holes allow the worms to travel up into the next level. And you add more food to this level. So what happens is the worms will migrate toward the food. And you continue this until you run out of levels to add onto your vermiculture system. And when the worms have migrated all the way up to the top, you can take the compost that you started with at the bottom, add it to your plants in your backyard or wherever, or donate it or sell it, and empty it out. And then once you've emptied it out, then you put the empty one on top, and the whole cycle repeats. So it's a great way to let the worms do most of the work for you, and can generate a terrific compost tea, which is an awesome fertilizer. That tea, you dilute it and you can add it to your yard or to your house plants, and it's an excellent fertilizer. You do want to dilute it because it is very strong, but once you do, a little goes a long way and is a great way to keep your plants fed. The second method we learned about recently, thanks to an article in the New York Times about, and it uses Coir and Ash. And it is a process of composting that can actually be employed indoors. Now, we have a deck on our situation, so we just kept it out on the deck. And you do have to order some material, but during the pandemic, this was a great alternative because New York City stopped collecting the food scraps, and we didn't want to, for all the reasons we mentioned earlier, we didn't want to put our food waste into the landfill. So we tried this method, and we're really pleased with how it works. And you can see the results here. That is our bin on the lower left. The one on the lower right is actually from the New York Times article from Hiroko Tabuchi, and she enlightened us to this process, which is very popular in Japan. And she uses it inside and just puts like a cloth cover over it. So this process does use oxygen and takes advantage of that. She puts the cover over the top to prevent flies. I would get flies because we had it out on our deck, but that was okay. It didn't bother us. It was out on our deck. But it's very simple, and it took a couple of weeks of really nasty food waste that had been piling up during a year ago at this time. And by adding in coconut peat, which you can see here, which we ordered as a brick, right? It comes in a block like this, and this is essentially the coconut that's been shredded and then compressed and dehydrated into a solid brick. So it comes in a little sealed bag like this, and it's very hard, and I used a knife to kind of pry it open. But then once you pry it into chunks and you put those chunks in with the food waste, it almost instantly absorbs the moisture and then becomes soft, and then you can crumble it up in your hands. And so this actually became a quite satisfying ritual in the morning during the pandemic, as I'd come out and I'd come to our food scraps and just crumble up this coconut after it had spent a night amongst the food waste. and the food scraps. And so you went from something that was very hard to something that absorbs the moisture and becomes crumbly overnight. And I was amazed at just how quickly you could take the food scraps and turn them into a rich soil amendment almost overnight. Now you also want to add a little bit of ash, and in the US it was easier to order hardwood ash, so I have a little bit of hardwood ash in here, and I'll show you what it looks like. Hopefully not getting any ash inside my computer, but you can see that's something that is available online as well. So that is a con to this, a downside to this process. You have to order some elements, but during situations like this past year, it was a great way to keep our food scraps from contributing to global warming. And now we're going to go into the Bokashi method. Maite.
Yep, welcome to Bokashi. Bokashi is the word for fermented organic matter, and this process is awesome. What happens is that in an airtight sealed container, you start to layer organic matter. So this includes vegetables, fruits, but unlike the general ruling that we mentioned for previous methods that you can't use dairy or meat, you can use dairy and meat in Bokashi. You also need a Bokashi inoculant or the Kickstarter, which starts the process of fermentation. It is a bit higher maintenance and trickier to get right, since you do have to handle it every day, and it is an anaerobic process. So what that means is that it requires no air whatsoever. So note that if you have an airtight concealed, airtight container, it can be any kind of container whatsoever. I liked to use old jars just because I had them at hand and I would use them in my apartment in New York City. So what you do is you layer, you add in the inoculant, the Kickstarter, and slowly the fermentation process is going to start. What the maintenance part is every day you have to be squishing those layers while you're adding more organic matter to it. And this kind of starts releasing a juice. Once that happens, you want to start taking that out every week or so, depending on how much organic matter you're putting into it. But what you get out of it is this amazing tea, which I have a little sample of it here. It doesn't smell great, which is why you have to start to move it outwards. Take it out of your jar every once in a while. It also releases space for more of it to be produced. But it's really, really great just because it serves so many different purposes. It can be poured into your sinks, your bathroom, toilet, and it'll cleaning it out, preventing algae and clogging, and it controls odor as well as contributing to a healthy amount of good bacteria competing with bad bacteria in our waterways. It's a liquid fertilizer. My plants were super generous after I would use the Bokashi juice with them. And I used this in New York City. It was under my sink. It was very easy for me once I got the hang of it. And it's an awesome liquid in general.
Okay, then. So our last method is the backyard bin and backyard composting. So if you have a backyard, a deck, a patio, or some kind of outdoor space, you can use this method. To start, you need to get a bin or some kind of enclosed container to use. So we're going to show a little demo video of how you can do this.
Okay, this is how you compost using a tumbler bin, which is on the spinning axis. So all you have to do is you collect your greens, which are fruits, vegetable ends, and you throw them in here like this, nice and easy. And then you take your brown material, which consists of paper, ripped up paper, leaves, wood chips, anything that's kind of brown. And you're doing weight for weight, so there's going to be a lot more brown than there is green material. And you dump it in. So you see the leaves. I like to put the brown material on top, so there's no bugs or flies or anything that get into it. And then all you do is you stick your lid back on, snap it in place, and then you rotate this guy like once or twice a day. And then in a few months, you'll have amazing compost to use for your garden.
Yeah, so basically there's many different types of tumblers. Some have 2 sections, some have 1. But basically the idea is that there's not a lot of maintenance. You just have to make sure that you really have the right, the right mixture. So there's like 2 different rules. Like you can do 2 parts brown material, 1 part green material, or you could do by weight. So it seems like you always have a lot more of brown materials, and basically this stops smells from happening. You know, a well-balanced compost bin shouldn't smell. And when this is all done, you get like a really nice compost that it smells like rich soil. That's how you know it's done. Yeah, I mean, I've been using this method for a little while. It's really great. I use my dad's wood shavings to put in there, and dried leaves and ripped up paper, and then all of our kitchen scraps, and it works really great. So I highly recommend.
You can see, even though not many folks, or there are a lot of people in New York City who don't have backyards, hopefully you can see that it doesn't take up nearly as much space as you think it might. Mm-hmm. And you can use that material for your own plants. And so if you just have enough space for a few plants, this is a great way to feed them.
Yeah, and they make small ones. Like that one that I was demoing with is pretty large. But yeah, they make smaller ones, and yeah, there's all different sizes.
All right, so I think we have come to the end. I would like to add just a little bit about where we are in the world right now. We're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Over this past year, we've learned what it means to flatten the curve, and the idea being that if we can keep our hospitals within their capacity to take care of patients, that we can really survive these surges that we've seen. And this lesson, hopefully, can be one that can be applied to the circular economy. We know, meaning that we know that there's some damage that's baked in. But even if we were to switch to entirely renewable energy, there's going to be some damage that was baked in from years of polluting earlier. But the same lesson that we learned from flattening the curve can be applied to the circular economy, where if we can reduce our emissions and keep the damage from spiking, but instead spread it out, then we can keep it within our planet's ecological capacity to sustain life. So I'm hoping that we can treat this pandemic as a trial run for combating climate change. And with that, I'd love to conclude and take questions.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thank you to our experts for sharing their knowledge, and to our viewers for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed it. As Barrett just mentioned, we are welcoming all sorts of questions. We'll answer those that have been asked already. But just before I do, I'd just like to remind everybody that we'll be posting a recording, a podcast, the presentation, and all other reference resources throughout the workshop on our website at circulareconomymfg.com/resources. Just hit on workshops and it will all be there. So that's it. If anybody has any questions, please do drop them into the comment section and our experts will be happy to respond. I'll start reading out a few that we have already.
I'm just seeing them all now. This is great.
Yeah, we have a few. So Nicholas Yuan asked, why are there not more renewable energy practices in production?
In general, or as it relates to I'm not. Why are there not more renewable energy practices in production? That's a long answer to a very short question. I think we are finally coming to grips as a global society with the need to take this issue seriously. So we're seeing some very encouraging signs. We saw some very encouraging signs before the pandemic, and I think we will continue to see them as we recover. So I'm encouraged by the uniting of both global governments and the business community in the efforts to really address climate change for the first time. So I think we're going to see some significant changes in the years ahead as soon as we can get through this pandemic.
Brilliant. Here we have quite a good question from Ada Chen asking what kind or amounts of waste do non-powered by solar factories produce? So basically, what is the difference between what we do and what, not really a competition, but another company that does the same that we do, but in a different, using a different method? What is the environmental difference there?
Well, you're going to see all kinds of emissions into the air, but also in often in the solid materials as well. So the linear economy, unfortunately, comes with all kinds of waste. It produces waste, but also in the production process, you have greenhouse gases emitted all along the way. And so that's something that our business, as well as several others, are really trying to address, not just the product, but in the process as well.
Great, thanks for answering that, Barent. Ada Chen again. Sorry?
I was going to say, let's get a composting question.
A composting question. This one is composting. Ada Chen is on fire. She's asking all sorts of questions. Here we go. So she asked, what if I want to start composting, but my city doesn't offer composting?
A good one. I've been answering a lot. Do you guys want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. I would say the best thing to do is to try to find out who is your representative and who you can get into contact with in your local government to kind of show that, you know, this is an important thing, and it has to do with, you know, meeting city zero waste goals. And it's just really important, especially now, like in New York City, there's been some cuts. So even just calling and talking to them. I know Maite, you have more information about how to get in touch in New York City. But I would say just being active and like showing that your support for it is really helpful.
Yeah, also you don't necessarily have to, your city doesn't necessarily have to compost for you to participate in composting. Mm-hmm. So as these guys were mentioning before, you can do it in your backyard. If you have a backyard, you can use the Coir and Ash method, even if it's just in your New York City apartment. So yeah, your city composting is more of the drop-off location sort of situation. But you can compost just independently on your own as well, which is great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just make sure, like, also just look up. There's a lot of independent businesses that run compost pickups. Like I'm in Buffalo right now, and there's like a local composter that they come and collect, and it's like it's not expensive. It's like $100 for a year of compost pickup. Which is more expensive than throwing it out, I guess, but it's still not that much for an impact that goes on.
Yeah, and depending on how your garbage is dealt with, you know, in some cities, some municipalities, you pay by the number of bins that you use, so it might end up evening out when you compare it to how you might be paying for your waste otherwise. So if to Celeste's point, you don't wait for your city to set up a system. Start composting now. And what I hope that you take away from this is just how easy it is to get started. You just need a container. It can be a pail, it can be a bucket, it can be anything that you can start to store the food scraps in. That's how you get started. Bella had a picture earlier of all the different ways that people were collecting their food scraps, and it's not complicated. And so just get started, put them into something, store it in your fridge or freezer if that's easier for you, or store it outside. And then once it's built up, you take it in, and it becomes part of your weekly ritual to drop off that material, either on your curb if you're lucky, that's the easiest, right? Or to take it into a farmer's market if your city has it. But if you don't have it, you just start putting it into your plants in your garden, and assisting and feeding your trees in your plants and trees in your neighborhood. So yeah, just get started. That's the most important.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Brent. Here we have a question by, was somebody else answering?
No, go ahead. Can all paper towels be composted?
Not all, I would say.
Go for it.
Yeah, I would say it depends on, so technically, yes, paper towels are compostable. They'll break down, but you can't, if they're full of like, if you have Windex on it or chemicals or grease, like don't put it in your compost bin. So like really, if you're using it as a napkin or to wipe up a spill, sure, it can go in your compost, but we also want to limit the amount of paper towels going in your compost. So I guess the answer is no, but yes. If anybody wants to add to that.
Yeah, something else to be mindful about composting paper is what kind of paper that you're composting. So if it's a newspaper or if you printed ink onto it, like Bella said, if it has some kind of chemical or ink, then these chemicals are too heavy to be composted, and it's going to stay in the ground, in the soil that is being produced by whatever compost method that you're using. And that same soil is going to be used for your plants, for your herbs, for your garden, for parks. And so we don't want our food growing from compost that has these chemicals in them as well. So I'd be wary with what is on the paper. But paper bags, paper towels that don't have like an excessive amount of ink or chemicals are perfectly fine.
Or not bleached. Bleach is another one to look out for. And you can get unbleached paper towels through 7th Generation and other sustainable brand manufacturers. But you also ought to think about getting a reusable cloth, right? like we want to reuse everything. So even paper towels and napkins, try and find a towel that you can wash, instead of constantly churning through all of the single-use products, which also includes paper.
Yeah. What Maitha said earlier, also I'd like to reiterate, about don't compost anything that you wouldn't like to eat tomatoes that have grown in that soil from. You know what I mean? So sort of try to have all natural ingredients in there. Here we go. Question from the Light Lifestyle. What are some solutions or recommendations for raising awareness to get more people to compost in their apartments? Multifamily composting is not available in many locations. This workshop is one attempt to do that.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we're trying to do. Hopefully what I said earlier, just to get started and to let people know that it's not that complicated. I think there's this hesitation because they think they've got to do something special with it. Just start collecting the food scraps. Put them in an old coffee can or put them in an old bucket. Just start doing it and then figure out the next steps. Where do I take it? And once you start taking it on a regular basis someplace, then you'll start figuring out, oh, actually there's a community garden in my neighborhood that I can drop it off, or I can start using it in my plants. So the most important thing, I think, is to just get started and realize what an incredible loss it is for our global society when we take these valuable nutrients and we pull them out of the system, right? We spend all of these resources growing this rich, fertile, delicious tasting food, and then if we put it into a landfill, all of those nutrients are lost. And so instead, if we can just get people to realize that composting helps keep those nutrients in play by putting them back into the soil, wherever that might be, that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we also you can follow us on social media and sort of share our content. We also sort of promote a lot of this awareness through there and through our newsletter, which you're also all welcome, of course, to subscribe to by going to our website. Here we have a question by Kate A. How important is buying organic versus conventional if you're composting? Very good question. Do the pesticides harm worms and soil?
Well, I mean, this is a big question. I mean, we can get into how important it is to buy organic to begin with. But I mean, I haven't done extensive research on, the differences, but I would say it is fine to compost non-organic produce. Anybody have anything to add to that?
No, I think it's better than not doing it, right?
Yes.
So, and I haven't read anywhere that tracks any type of damage from conventional, right? Like we have to recognize, first of all, that conventional is a new construct, right? And that really comes from factory farming and involves a tremendous amount of synthetic fertilizer. So at the beginning, we got to question whether or not we should even continue to call that conventional farming, because it is a very synthetic process at this point. So it's better to compost that material than to not compost it, but certainly the more we can switch to organic farming and organic produce, the better. And the more people that do that, you increase the economics of scale, and what is now a little bit more expensive, we can start to drive down those prices as well.
Yeah, I think a really good point to add is also supporting local farmers and local farmers markets, since they're the ones doing the good work. The same as just what Barron said, by supporting them, these higher prices start to draw down if more of us start to invest in those services.
Yeah, and also with farmers markets, a lot of even though it might not be labeled as organic, a lot of those farmers do practice organic practices. It's just that organic is a name that you have to pay for essentially and be certified for. So a lot of those small farmers don't have the funds to do that. But if you ask them, they'll be happy to share their growing practices. And most of the time it is using organic methods.
It'd still be great if they go and get certified, right? But yeah, Bella's point's a good one, is that oftentimes they are doing the organic practices but haven't gotten the certification.
Right. George DiCiaro is asking an opinion question. In your opinion, what method of composting makes the most economical business sense?
I guess my question then, to clarify, is for who? Is it for the city, or is it for the individual? Are you thinking, from the citizen's point of view? So this Coir and Ash method I had to pay for, right? So if I'm looking at it from the citizen's point of view, that's something that I have to pay for. So I have to be committed enough to do that. It would be nice if the city would offer curbside composting so that we wouldn't have to. Ultimately, I think your question goes to this idea of the true cost. Like right now, the way our linear system is set up, we don't pay the true cost for really anything, right? We don't pay the true costs of our inexpensive fossil fuels, including the atmosphere. Like that cost is not being calculated in the price of the gas that we buy, and yet it's real and it's happening. So if we look at the impacts that cities have and the waste that cities have and how much they could save by reducing the greenhouse gases from landfill, it's a tremendous long-term benefit. So your question kind of points to the fact that there isn't a good accounting system that truly measures all of the environmental impacts currently. So it's something we need to change. And then you can start to make a better business case. Right now, we're relying on a lot of goodwill and recognition that these have tremendous long-term benefits, and then later we can find and track the data to either support or refute that assumption. But I think your question really goes to the fact that we need to do a better job at tracking the true cost of all of our actions, particularly in this linear economy.
Thanks, Barrett. We have a peculiar but interesting question here. From, again, Eve Marengi. Do you need to worry about animals such as bears with the compost tumbler? I think that's a question for Bella, I would say.
Yeah. So I don't live where there are bears, but if you do have animals that could get into it, I would say make sure you get a really sturdy bin with a lid that, clamps on there somehow. Also probably increase the amount of brown material you're putting in so that lessens the amount of smell. And don't put in any, meat or bones that would attract, animals. And, put it in maybe an enclosed area. There's some preventative measures to take. I don't know if it's that big of an issue. I haven't read that much about it, but I would say, just making sure to reduce the amount of smell would definitely help that. And that's by adding more browns and mixing it often and making sure you're really monitoring what's going on in there.
Great. The Light Lifestyle asks, does anyone here have any experience composting pet waste? I know it needs a separate container that is not used on or near food or soil growing food. What recommendations do you have for pet food?
So I actually was just looking this up a little bit because when my dad was talking, he used to do this with his pets' waste when he was a kid. But after looking it up, actually, I found that kind of the best way besides composting is to also flush it down the toilet, because there's a way to, we have these systems built in to deal with it, as opposed to, throwing out in a landfill where it definitely won't break down. But yeah, there are you can go to any pet store and they have little pet composters that you put the pet waste in. That could work. I've never tried it. I don't know if anybody else has.
Yeah,
but it is an option.
Tried. It was if I'm remembering correctly, it's been a while. I used to have a dog. He passed after 13 years. But there was some product that I remember trying, and it was, you could pick up the pet waste and it was a bag that would dissolve quickly. So you could then take that whole bag and drop it into the toilet. So it was kind of like a quick dissolving bag. So that was one option. I'm curious, what you said, what did your dad used to do? Would he put it in the toilet also? Is that what?
No, he said, I have to talk to him more about this, but he did say he had one from that he bought somewhere that he actually used to do it as a kid. You put it, I don't know all the details, so I can't explain, but he did try to compost it at one point.
Interesting. Yeah, if you think about it, animals are defecating in nature all the time, right? It's a natural process. The problem becomes when we increase the density, in our case of our species, humans, where we have so much waste piling up that it ends up being a real disease carrier. And so that's really the problem when you generate so much of it in one location, that it can be a real problem. So, but out in the wild, do you think animals are doing it all the time? And as William McDermott would say, waste equals food, where that poop is going to be nutrients for other species along that ecosystem.
Yeah, and I see in the comments about the cat waste, and I think that you can't really flush that because of the litter that's kind of clumping around it. And that's one difference between dog and cat.
Thank you for that extensive answer on poo. It needed to be said. It needed to be said. A question here we have by George Lucero. can you speak a little bit about the pros and cons of fats, oils, and grease in composting, please?
Oh boy, is this like the Fatberg question? Bella, did you get into this with your thesis work at all?
Well, I mean, I don't know the specific reasons why you're not supposed to put fats and oils and grease in a compost bin, but you're not supposed to. I don't know the exact reason.
I think the reason behind it is because, at least for like vermiculture, it makes the worms sick.
Interesting.
So that's the reason, because we've got worm bins here at home as well. And so these worms, they don't respond well to grease. Like they'll get sick. That's what my mother has told me about her worm friends.
Well, if you think about it, we're a species that have collected a lot of fat, oils, and grease, right? Like it's difficult to find fat, oils, and grease in nature, right? It's spread out amongst all of the different plants and animals. And yet our species has done a really good job at condensing them and putting them in a nice little plastic bag for us to devour. And so it goes back to this issue of density. We just have brought together so much of the fat and oil and grease that you wouldn't otherwise find in nature, that's when it really presents a problem.
Yeah, I think in terms of the question between pros and cons, I would say it's just mostly cons because of the reasons why Baron is saying you don't find greases or oils or these heavy fats in nature. And if you, here in my household, we have a mostly vegetarian diet. Half my family is vegetarian. So there's not that much waste that goes into the worms that is based on fats, greases, or oils.
Cool.
I think we're coming up on time. Are there any other last questions, or is that a good one?
Somebody just read the cat poo thing, talking about disease, saying that cat poo risks carrying some pathogens harmful to humans in response to the conversation that Bella was having.
Yeah. Yep, good point.
Interesting. Brilliant. Well, thank you all for joining. That was exactly 1 hour. Yeah, it was a real pleasure to have you all here and to answer all your questions. So go and enjoy the rest of Circular City Week, and we'll be looking forward to hopefully be seeing you in one of our future monthly workshops. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.